So I was a civilian faculty at West Point. I taught empathy in the Army. Okay.
Wow.
I taught empathy at Goldman Sachs and Bridgewater. Okay. Like these are organizations you wouldn't think would care about this. What's product market fit if it's not customer empathy? What is a high performing team if it's not empathy for each other's skill sets, right? The misconception that empathy is a soft skill and that it's not going to be the edge you need to get ahead. That's bullshit. Yeah, I started in 2004 as a digital agency at 24 years old.
Wow.
2004 to 2008, because it was like flash websites, right? It was
Yeah.
2004 to 2008, we built a good business, expanded into experiential. We're doing well, 40 people or so. And then pandemic hit. Not pandemic, financial crisis hit.
Yeah.
The other disaster.
Yeah. There's too many.
And all the experiential budgets, anything that was not above the line traditional advertising budgets got crushed.
Right.
And so partners wanted to depart and go find something more secure. Cash flow was super tight. I scaled it back down to like 10 people and reset the whole vision of the business. Went to a couple good clients and said, what can we do to meet your needs and also meet mine as a business that's growing? And Beth Comstock at GE was one of those people. And she said, we have a lot of expensive clients that we pay a lot of money for, a lot of expensive consultants that we spend a lot of money to recommend. And then we have a lot of agencies that we spend money to execute. And rarely do those two meet because there's usually like a 6-month period in between where like one thing sunsets, then we go in and sell it in and make sense of it. And then we go and brief an agency or run an RFP, and the sun is setting on the idea and we're in a hurry and budgets have changed, but we've got to get it out. And if we could have one shop that could also recommend and do, that would solve a lot of our problems. And so that was sort of the origin story of Sub Rosa.
Well, that's a great way to segue into introducing our latest guest on Out of Scope, Michael Ventura. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
I'd love to start sort of on the topic that we're at. You just let me know that you ran an agency for 17 years before selling it. We just celebrated our 5th anniversary.
Congrats.
Thank you. Last week, which, as you alluded to before, 5 years running an agency feels like many more than that. What do you think about when you think back to your early days running an agency? When you think of those first 5 years getting off the ground, what was that like?
Scrappy as hell. I mean, that time in a business is guerrilla warfare, right? And it's you've got to fight for every moment you get. You've got to be ultra prepared. You're gonna be the smallest, competitor in the pool typically. Everybody's got some snazzy italicized word on the second page of their deck that tells their client that they're this and no one else is, right? And so like, how real is that stuff? And making it real is what those first 5 years tend to be. Figuring out what is our special sauce? What is the thing that makes us unique besides the work product? Because the work is always going to be good if you're in the room, right? Like if you've been invited to the dance at this point, like you probably have a decent portfolio. You've proven the basics. But what's beyond that? And that took a while to really kind of galvanize for us. Ultimately, we landed on the practice of empathy and built a whole method around it and taught our team how to do it and taught it academically. Eventually wrote the book that you and I have talked about it. But that was something bigger than the service offering. And I think that a lot of shops really just focus on like putting sparkle on their service offering, and that just feels fungible.
And what kinds of clients did you have in the early days? Obviously, I can speak to the experience of needing to convince clients to take early bets on you. What were the kinds of companies that you worked with, and what were some of those initial successful projects?
Yeah, so this is going back into the early aughts where digital and social were still very Wild West, right? I mean, we're talking like Flash websites and Friendster, right? And we were of that generation. So our competitive edge was that we weren't Razorfish, who was going to be pitching on this piece of business against us with a bunch of very sophisticated adults who have been doing work in the quote unquote digital space as it was just getting off the ground in the late 90s. We were kids, I was 24 years old, 25 years old, and my partner was too. But we were native to a lot of this technology, and we could sit in a room and say, look, we're not going to be as, buttoned up and 150-page decks every time we walk in the door as some of these other shops. But we can tell you what people care about. We can tell you which way the wind is blowing. We can build and design the things you need. And we're always going to tell you what we think is true and honest about this marketplace. And so a lot of clients liked that and found it refreshing. And we were, a fraction of the price of what a Razorfish was going to charge to do that work. And so the first big break we got was from Frank Cooper, who was then CMO at PepsiCo. And they gave us a piece of work on Mountain Dew where they said, look, Mountain Dew for many years has been the action sports brand. When you're on the mountain, when you're on the wave, we're there. We're sponsoring X Games. We're doing all of that. And Mountain Dew lost a lot of share around that time when Red Bull had first launched, because there's a whole reason why, but Mountain Dew's not an on-premise mixer. Red Bull was, so the bar scene was becoming like the wedge for that audience, and Mountain Dew didn't have a place there. And so they said, help us figure out where we are when we're not on the mountain or the wave. And so we found street culture, skate culture, like a lot of other places that were sort of adjacent to the action sport world, but were happening in cities, and kind of found ways to elegantly pull them into that.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
So fast forward 10, 12, 14 years, at what point do you start to think, okay, ready to think about moving this agency on to its next evolution? What are some of the key tipping points that end up that result in you eventually selling your agency?
So I think one is building a exceptional team around you. And that's not like planned obsolescence, but it kind of is for a founder. If you start to put the right people in place and they are all exceptional at what they do, your role really becomes a bit more of the conductor of the orchestra, and then eventually kind of just like a meaningful contributor to it, but not necessarily a main player. And I was starting to see that happen for all the right reasons. We had put a great exec team around me, and then as time went on, all of our sort of department leads were also exceptional. And so like we really kind of built this strong thing. And some days I would come in and it was just humming, right? And you could feel it. And the work was good and the clients were happy and the phone was ringing and the press was out there. And I had this moment where I looked around and I was like, I've done what I wanted to do here. This is me finishing my 24-year-old dream, but this is not my 40-year-old dream. And I want permission to dream again. And to like think about, well, what is it if it's not this? Because this isn't it. I didn't want to run an agency for 50 years. So that was really the light bulb for me, is to say like, finish this as elegantly as you can, honor that younger version of myself who had a vision for what this could be, see it through, and then get some space to think again and try something new.
I love that concept of being given permission to dream again and be inspired again, which sounds simplistic when you say it out loud, but you actually have to say that out loud and think about it. Otherwise, you might forget to do it.
And it's scary, yeah, because like all of the security that came with that, right? Like, the work you work so hard to do to establish like good base salaries and bonus structures and, employee stock option plans and healthcare and like all of those things, like it gives you the golden handcuff that you kind of don't want to unlatch yourself from at some point. But I don't know. For me, I like to build and I like to create, and I just knew I needed to do that again.
So you sell your agency. This is what, 10?
This is you're almost 10 years. So I was end of 2017.
Okay, and so what happens in 2017? Take us through the last several years.
So 3 years on the earn-out journey. Ups and downs, they're all complicated and hard. At the end of that, it's peak pandemic, August of 2020.
Peak pandemic.
Yeah, no vaccines yet. Like, I mean, like truly, like we're in the we're still figuring out what is this thing and where is it going. And New York was, the epicenter at that point. I was on calls with friends who ran agencies every month talking about like what's a PPP loan and like all of this kind of stuff, figuring it out as we went. And so then when I was out, it was also air travel was funky. You weren't like going on trips, and so I rented an Airstream. And at the time had 2 dogs, and my wife and I got in an Airstream, and we just drove around America, and we asked ourselves questions about what we were going to do next and what was happening, what's going on in this weird world. And from that point till now, so then got back and kind of said, all right, I'm going to figure out something else, and really started to map out what I now see as sort of a portfolio career, a chapter of my life where there's diversification across a variety of different things that I spend my time doing. Each of them fill cups for me in different ways. And, it's also been a very hard 5 years for me in the last 5, personally, professionally. There's been more tumult and more change in ways that I didn't necessarily expect, but has been, a real teacher and a growth opportunity. And I think that's unconsciously probably what I set in motion by making the decision to make a change.
I have a few follow-up questions on driving around America. One, can you give a place that you expected to be great and it wasn't, and it's a place that you didn't expect a lot from and it was, amazing or whatever?
Yeah, for sure. So I'll answer the second part first, which was Arkansas.
Oh,
I did not expect Arkansas to be a spot we would stay in for very long.
In Little Rock?
We were in a state campground. I want to say, I can't remember the name of it, but it was right near the Mississippi. It was gorgeous. And we pulled in and there was no one there. We were the only people because, again, it's the middle. It's now probably like late November. Pandemic's raging. We stayed an extra few days. The dogs were having a blast. Once in a while, a ranger would come by and we'd talk with them for a half hour or so. But we were just alone in the woods, and it was so peaceful and so beautiful. Like the nature there was great. Really had a great time there. In the inverse, something that we thought was going to be great and kind of like was a twist. We broke down because Airstreams are, challenging sometimes, on our way to, I think it was Santa Fe. But what ended up being sort of a silver lining in it is we pulled off to the side of the road. We were like, all right, we'll get this repair done in the morning. But it was the night of the election that Biden won. And so we were literally like on the side of the road with like our barely a signal coming into our phones, seeing it happen, and like, opened a bottle of wine and like celebrated this like grateful moment for democracy in that time.
What a time.
Yeah.
November 2020. Oh my goodness. I remember that vividly, although it wasn't called until 4 days later, technically. So was this the night of election?
It was the night they called it. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Got it. Yeah. What a time. That, man, that sounds like so much fun driving around the country. Did you have any big revelations or epiphanies about America or?
Well, I think yes, in that regard. I shook my head no when you first asked it because I was thinking you were going to ask, did I have any about myself? Which didn't happen until I got back. And then the quiet of everything kind of settled. But during the journey, I think what I saw was there's a lot more similarity and a lot more sameness in rural and suburban America than there is in cities too. People all want the same things. They want to feel safe. They want their kids to get a good education. They want to be able to pay their bills. And we spent a lot of time. Like I was at this one winery on the ride at one point, and we had stopped for dinner. And this couple came over and they said, we've been watching you guys with your dogs and we'd just love to hear your story. You're definitely not from around here, right? So we started talking. And at the end of it, they said, would you mind if we just prayed over you for your journey? Wow. And we sat there and they just prayed for us for 5 minutes. And we all gave each other hugs. And we took some nice film photography of them. We sent them the shots afterwards when we got them processed. And it was just like, people want to be felt and seen and heard. And it was nice to just do that for a while.
That's such a sweet moment.
Yeah.
You wouldn't tend to see that in New York. My wife is from New Orleans, and so over the last many years, I've gotten a lot more exposure to Southern culture
Yep.
and just a little bit more general pleasantness
Yeah.
among people, and you
Yeah.
see some more moments like that.
Yeah, someone told us on the journey when we were going through a toll booth one point, and we were waiting a while to get to the front and pay, and we got there, and I said, "Oh, it's going slow today, huh?" And they said, "Oh, the payment's just sort of a secondary thing. It's the conversation that everyone's here for."
Whew. Sometimes it feels like the rest of the world has one big scene from My Cousin Vinny.
Yes.
Okay, so back to what you're focused on now. Tell us a little bit about the book you're writing now. What that process has been like, and what your plan is for that over the next year.
So it's kind of a perfect segue. So we get back from this journey. It's now December of 2020. And a couple days go by and I'm like, all right, now I got to like really think about what I'm going to do next. And something just happens. I get a long like scroll of butcher paper. I lay it out on the coffee table. I get a bunch of markers and Post-its. And I just sit down and I'm like, just like sketch out a plan for yourself. See what you want to do. Think about stuff. And I had always kept in my little notes file on my phone a note that was entitled Next, and I still have it, right? Like it's always like, what do I want to think about next? Just put it in there, like just so I don't lose track of it. And sometimes I'll go back and read it and I'll be like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. That's a good idea. I should do that one day, but that's not a today thing, but I'll keep it in there. And so I just went through that and sat and thought for a little while, and I started to lay all these things out and move them around the table and landed on something that was pretty profound, sort of like a real, what I now call a constellation of purpose, right? This idea that there isn't a North Star for me that is going to be the one ring to rule them all, that like this is what I'm out after. But the gestalt of these 7 or 8 things, that this fills a cup in a very different way than that does. And this is going to make a lot of money, but this one's actually going to make me feel really creatively excited, but it's never going to be a moneymaker. And then I need this thing for my own personal development or whatever it is. And so I built this thing out, and I thought it was just for me. And so I started talking with some friends who were all going through their version of an existential crisis as the pandemic's happening. And they were like, so what are you going to do now? And then I explained what I did. And they were like, can you show me like what you did? And could I try it? And so I made a PDF and I just started sending it to my friends. And then they'd call me like a month later and they'd be like, holy shit, I figured something out that I never would have thought about for myself. This was really helpful. And so then I was on the phone with my literary agent and I was telling her about it. And she said, duh, this is your next book. And I was like, oh, yeah, I didn't even think about this as a book. And so that's kind of how the book was born, which is called Constellation Thinking. It'll be out at the end of this year. But, the premise of it is, can you use systems thinking as a way to evaluate the careabouts in your life, the things that matter most, and then build a constellation of purpose so that you can diversify your efforts and your interests and not get stuck in this one-track world that, frankly, doesn't exist for a lot of people anymore.
And so I'm very fascinated by this because over the last 2 to 3 years, have begun to systematize my life in ways that I never realized was necessary for me being productive day to day. I'm curious, can you give some examples of,
So if you think about what I refer to in this, each of the quote unquote stars in your constellation would be what I call pursuits.
Yeah.
So a pursuit's not a goal. If it's a pass fail or I did or I didn't do it, that's a goal. Mm-hmm. And you can have goals under pursuits, but a pursuit might be something like deepen my wellness practice. Okay. Mm-hmm. Inside that might be learn yoga, right? And I can pass fail on yoga, but whether I pass or I fail, it's still part of my deepening of that practice, right? I'm trying
just the effort of doing it. Yeah.
So it's 100%. Sort of like longer arcs. So what are those longer arcs? And then once you know what those are, there's a whole extra nerdy quantifiable process in the book that it eventually plots them into different parts of the self. So I have 3 that I've identified: the inner self, the outer self, and the higher self. So some pursuits might be really oriented around inner self development. Mm-hmm. Things like your belief systems or your values or something that's really deeply tied to your identity. that might not be something that has any commercial value. That might not be for something that you even share with anyone else. That might just be a private thing for you. And that's okay. We need some of those because our inner self deserves to be developed. Our outer self are things like relationships, the places we spend our time, the service we put into the world to support people beyond ourself and our immediate family, right? Like, what are those kinds of things? And there's others as well. And then higher self is sort of the longer picture things of what's the legacy you want to leave? What's the wisdom you want to acquire while you're here? And how can we think about pursuits that also eke toward that? And if we can build a quote unquote balanced portfolio across inner, outer, and higher selves across these different pursuits, life feels more fulfilling.
Fascinating. And what are what are some of your pursuits that you've been that either as a result of creating these networks or in parallel, I suppose. I'm curious some of those internal external pursuits that you're after.
So one of them for me is to continue to develop what I refer to as sort of like ideas for adult development, because I have been a beneficiary of a lot of teachers and a lot of schools of thought that have helped me grow as a person. I have plenty more growing to do, but I've learned a lot through that. So Applied Empathy, my first book, was a tool for adult development. It helped you learn how to be a more empathic leader, collaborator, problem solver, partner. This new book, same vein. So thought leadership, but thought leadership in that category. And that's really important to me. Another one is continuing to balance a life lived in cities and in nature, because that balance gets thrown off sometimes. And I've lived in New York City when I was in like full time since 2002, and this is home, but I also really need to get the hell out of here sometimes, right?
Sure.
And that balance, the way that balances changes over the years. Sometimes it's about, renting a house outside of town for the last 4 years, which is what I've been doing. But other times it's just been taking more trips. But I know that's something that feeds my equilibrium and keeps it balanced. And so I have to keep that on the constellation. And then there's entrepreneurial ventures, and there's things like, continuing education stuff for myself. There's philanthropic work that I do. All of them have their homes in the constellation, and collectively it feels like the right itches get scratched.
Can you talk to me a little bit about the role empathy has in business, how that relates in building teams? I've personally seen it come into play on, for example, a gender front where I see that it's a lot harder to find that empathetic skill set in men than in women, as an example.
Yeah. So I think with the misconception that empathy is a soft skill, and that it's not going to be the edge you need to get ahead, that's bullshit. And I'll give you a couple of reasons why. First of all, empathy is one of the most fundamental leadership skills you could possibly ask for, because if you understand each other, if you understand your team, if you understand your customers, if you understand your shareholders, if you understand yourself and your own leadership style and your own faults and your own deficiencies, you get better at doing that stuff. When you blindly just operate with a one-size-fits-all style leadership approach, it doesn't land for a lot of people. It doesn't land for some clients. You've got to adjust. You've got to augment. And that's not just true in services businesses. That's true in product businesses too. And when I hear people talk about it as a soft skill, the first thing I like to tell them, because I was going to say remind them, but most of them don't know this. So I was a civilian faculty at West Point. I taught empathy in the Army. Okay. Wow. I taught empathy at Goldman Sachs and Bridgewater. Okay. Like, these are organizations you wouldn't think would care about this. What's product market fit if it's not customer empathy? What is a high performing team if it's not empathy for each other's skill sets, right? Empathy is not about being nice. It's not about being sympathetic or compassionate. And so I'll quickly unpack those because I think it's helpful for people to hear. Sympathy is I feel bad for you, right? You never really feel sympathetic for the lottery winner or someone on their wedding day, right? That's usually in response to an adverse set of circumstances. You feel bad for somebody else. Compassion is I want to help. I see you're going through something difficult, and I would like to try to help you through it. You do not need to understand. You don't need to empathize with someone to feel sympathetic or compassionate. It increases the likelihood. But I've never been a Syrian refugee. I can still feel terrible about what that must feel like, and I could want to help. but I don't know what that lived experience is like until I go and meet one and talk with them and ask them questions and understand what their lived experience is like, right? So empathy is I want to understand. And so applied empathy is self-aware perspective taking to gain richer and deeper understanding. So how do we turn that lens inward and understand where our blind spots are and where our strengths are? And then how do we bravely go and do the two things that most people don't like to do? First is admit they don't have the answer. And so they're, instead of proposing an answer, they're going to ask a question. And then the second is be willing to change your intended behavior based on new information. So I have a supposition around how I might lead this person on my team. But if I don't go over and understand, how are you motivated? What gets you excited? Does pressure motivate you? Does encouragement motivate you? Does reward motivate you? What is the motivator I need to know as your manager to help get the most out of you? And then if they tell me that and I don't change, we're not going to get there. But if they tell me like, I need pressure, great. I will create more, deliverables and timelines and things to kind of keep that heat on so that we get the most out of you.
Yeah. I appreciate that that breakdown, and I think that there's a lot of interchangeability that people use with those words
That's right.
that really shouldn't be. Um, and do you plan to? You obviously enjoy writing. You obviously enjoy publishing. Do you think you're on a series of books? Is this the second?
I have a third one that's already like sketched out. This is my like. One of my turning that lens inward observations is like land the plane you're on before you build the next one, but I do have an outline for a third one that's in motion. But what I really love doing and because writing a book is one thing, sharing it is another. And so I've spent the last 6-7 years now sharing applied empathy in keynotes and workshops and stuff like that. There's nothing I really enjoy more than like being able to spend time with someone else's team and help them understand how to work with these tools and bring it to life in their work and see what happens when an organization sucks this into its culture and then sees it operate at scale, offsites, retreats, things like that. It's so fun for me as someone who was an entrepreneur with a team for 20 years. My team was extension of my own heart and body, right? And so now being individual on my own, most of my work that I'm doing. I mean, I still work with teams, but they're not my FTEs, right? And so it gives me that connection to that evolution and change and growth. And I get to watch it. There's this organization I've been working with for the last 18 months, and I've seen their leaders change, and I've seen the way they talk to each other change, and I've seen how it's impacted their top line of their business and how their customers speak about them differently. And that's really cool to witness.
My last question for you is if you could go back and tell yourself something after you had been running your agency for 5 years, what would you tell that version of Michael Ventura? What advice would you give them? What perspective would you give?
I would,
which is of course a way of just asking me.
For your own. I know it happens to just be the same amount of years in business. Don't be afraid of it not working out according to plan. It will work out in whatever way it needs to. It's just rarely going to work out according to plan, and that's okay.
It became clear once we decided to launch the firm during the depths of the pandemic that things were going to happen in all kinds of unpredictable ways.
Yeah, and I led from a place of scarcity and fear early in the career because it was my first real foray into work life, right? And so we didn't have investors. We lived and died on our cash flow, and so if I made a mistake, I would come in the morning and I would look at 40 employees and I'd be like, these people might not be able to pay rent if I make another one of those mistakes. And that pressure was so much. And I didn't really know how to cope with it in my early days. And I learned and somaticized it in a way that became a motivator for me. But yeah, I shifting out of that fear and scarcity mindset and into a one that is oriented around being nimble, being observational, being willing to change, and being willing to, hold plans tightly, but also know when to let them go.
I was talking with a reporter recently who was asking me about growth of our firm. And I said, oh, we're a team of 20. And she goes, oh, so still a pretty small team. I was like, well, I don't think it's that small.
Yeah.
It's a lot. It's a lot of people to be responsible for.
Absolutely.
So it's
To add, I'll just add one last thing to that because I think it's. I was helping a law firm this past year do a big culture change, and they just put in a new CEO who is the youngest CEO in the firm's history. And part of the process was I was interviewing a lot of people in the leadership team, and one of them was the outgoing CEO who was retiring. And I said, "What's one thing you want him to know that you really want to make sure sinks in?" And he said, headcount is a young leader's measure of success. He goes, if I could do everything we did in this firm with 20% less people, we would have been more profitable and I would have had less problems. Don't just chase headcount.
That is very wise and well said, and a good note to end on. Thanks for coming, Michael.
Thanks for having me. It was a really great conversation.